What up, peeps? Welcome to the Hangout channel. Come hang out with your boy, man, and watch these crazy people do crazy things, things that I wouldn't do personally. And that's why I'm making the video, so we can just sit nice and easy and comfortable and within our own homes and watch some crazy people do crazy things in these caves, man. I'm never going cave diving. Never would I even think about it. But there is a lot of cave diving people out there and they like to get down there and risk their damn lives. And I don't agree with it. So with that being said, go ahead and get you some popcorn, a beverage, and help watch the footage with me. Hit that thumbs up and a like and we'll get this thing rolling, man. Let's go.
A day of cave exploring for a group of Boy Scouts was planned to be a challenging and educational adventure. When an unexpected encounter with a 5-inch fissure throws the plan into chaos, they could never have expected the deadly consequences of this unbelievable stroke of bad luck. This is the fatal breakdown of the Crooked Swamp caving tragedy. It was March 27, 1982, and Donald Weltner was excited about the adventure he had planned for the day. He and his two sons, Christopher and Roger, were going to be leading a Boy Scout group in a day of cave exploration. As a scoutmaster, Donald had taken his scout troop on several caving activities over the past year, so they knew the kind of day that lay ahead. The family met up with the other scoutmaster, who would be teaming up with Donald for the day. In total, they had 12 boys to look after, and would set the group rules right away. They needed to stay together in the main rooms, never leave their buddy while looking around, and only attempt passages that had been cleared by the scoutmasters. The passages of the Crooked Swamp cave system in New Jersey were notoriously narrow, but Donald and Jim weren't too worried. The boys were all much smaller than the two men, so they would lead the way for any exploration. If they could make it, then the boys could too. Maps of this cave show many narrow passages with low ceilings, where the clearance is only 1 foot.
Dude,
some of the scouts were pretty...
All it takes is for you to get stuck in a position like this and you can't move and you're done. You feel what I'm saying?
Excited about squeezing through these tough sections, while others were feeling more nervous about the claustrophobic conditions. Donald had taken several groups out to similar caves, so he knew the different responses that the kids might have to such conditions, and he and Jim were prepared to help everyone have a safe experience. After hiking out to the cave, the entrance was quite unassuming. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you would probably walk right past it. The opening was only 16 inches high and 28 inches wide, so if you were feeling unsure about tight squeezes, this would certainly be the first test for each person in the group. It was 2 o'clock on that Saturday when they entered the cave. The main path to the first room was relatively large for this cave system. The room height was between 8 and 11 feet high. This gave enough breathing space for the boys to spread out a little in an area that was around 300 square feet, with a few larger paths leading off of this room. Donald was on the east end of the room, and Jim was supervising the west side. There were several smaller tunnels leading off from the main room, but the men weren't sure which were known paths, and which would have been too small to navigate. Donald decided to check a tunnel that might connect to the next section of the cave system. He planned to check it out to confirm that it would be a good one for the scouts to try. Donald was fairly slim at 5 feet 11 inches tall, weighing 160 pounds. His two sons followed close behind him to report back if he was able to get through to a bigger room or join the next cave system. Donald was familiar with the stress of a tight squeeze, so he was prepared to push through a narrow spot in order to arrive in an interesting opening of the cave. He pulled himself along in a fairly tight area that was 18 inches by 20 inches. It wasn't so tight that he couldn't move along, but he was restricted from moving his arms back, and he couldn't lift his head well to see ahead. The tunnel was covered with slick mud, and it helped Donald slide forward when things were tight. He reported,
"Man, this is giving me anxiety, y'all. I don't know about y'all. This gives me anxiety every time I watch stuff like this."
Back to his sons as he moved along. The path he was following turned to the right, so he reached out to pull himself along, when he suddenly felt the ground disappear below him as he slid down into a tight crevice. The slippery mud made it impossible to catch himself and stop the out-of-control slip. It wasn't that he fell a great distance. It was only a few feet below the main path, but this keyhole-shaped tunnel narrowed into a tight wedge at the bottom. Donald yelled out to his sons to stop while he assessed his situation. His arms were trapped down at his sides, so he couldn't find a way to leverage himself back up. The path angled down 30 degrees, which had gravity working against him. The slippery mud caused his body to settle more and more into the tiny 5-inch wide crevice at the bottom of the passage. Each time he tried to push himself backwards, the rocks seemed to tighten around his body. It only took a few minutes to figure out that he wouldn't be able to get himself out alone. He asked Christopher to grab his feet and try to pull him backwards. He thought that with a little assistance, he could free his arm and reach back to grab one of the jagged rocks he'd passed. Christopher struggled to get a grip on his dad's muddy shoes in the tight confines of the tunnel. After several attempts by Donald and the boys to free him from the wedge, he told them to back out of the tunnel and get Scoutmaster Jim. They were certainly feeling the stress of the situation, but were confident that an adult would be able to help their dad out of this crack. Jim made his way into the restrictive tunnel and found the exposed legs of Donald sticking out of a turn in the passage. He was angled down at a 30-degree angle, which made it really hard to pull him out of the trap. Each time Jim pulled his legs, Donald could feel the cave tighten around his body.
Wow.
As Jim released his legs, the pressure eased and he slid forward back into the crevice.
Damn.
After some back and forth efforts, Jim realized he would need help to get Donald free. Jim was barely able to reach the area where Donald was stuck, since the tunnel squeezed down to just 18 inches in this area. It seemed unreal that his friend had just crawled forward into this tight spot, but now couldn't back out. Donald explained that some rocks had loosened when he slid, and it seemed that they were wedging against his body. Each time Jim pulled him back toward the passage, the rocks slid forward and blocked the exit hole, squeezing Donald's body in the process. This was not a situation that the two men would be able to fix on their own. Pulling backwards was only pushing Donald into an impossibly narrow squeeze, and there was no way for Donald to move forward, because he was pressed against the tunnel walls, which had narrowed to 5 inches just beyond his head. Donald was stunned to find himself in this position. Jim backed out of the tunnel and called for help. It had been nearly 3 hours since Donald had become stuck, and he had not moved an inch. The police put out the call for cave rescue specialists to assist in the tight tunnels. This wasn't the kind of space where a team of people could move in and rescue a stuck caver. The tunnel that Donald was stuck in was just big enough for one person to reach his feet at a time. The rescue teams got to work trying to rig up some ropes to pull him out of the tight passage. Even with the additional pull of several people, it only caused Donald to become more wedged under the ledge and rock keeping him trapped. The rescuers couldn't reach the rock that was blocking the path, and Donald's hands were trapped by his body in the narrow fissure he had slid into.
That's crazy.
Once they realized that pulling would not free him, they brought in the chisels and small jackhammers to try to move out some larger pieces of rock. This was painstaking work in the cramped space, with little progress to show for hours of work. Groups of 2 moved in and out of the passage to reach Donald and try to warm his body with a heat lamp and warm water bottles around his legs. They talked with Donald to assure him that they were going to find a way to free him. He felt completely helpless without the use of his arms and stuck under a rock that had broken free from the ceiling of this tunnel. Donald was cold and thirsty, but no one could reach his upper body to help alleviate his suffering. He asked them to call his wife and let her know he would be late tonight. The minutes and hours ticked by slowly for Donald, while he thought about how he got into this situation. It's hard to grasp the isolation he must have felt in that small pocket of space. Completely immobilized, physically trapped in every way possible, while being able to freely think, breathe, and talk. It was a frustrating nightmare that seemed to drag on and on. Cavers who knew the system well were aware that the other cave met this tunnel just near where Donald was stuck. They entered from the other side and explored until they found a passage that led directly to this tiny tunnel. But only the smallest cavers could squeeze into this passage. 2 sisters who joined the rescue effort were exactly what was needed to reach Donald. Lynn and Nancy Taylor were experienced cavers whose parents had led the way through a lifetime of cave exploration. They were also members of the National Cave Rescue Commission. They were 24 and 25 years old, but their size was the most important advantage they brought to this situation. Nancy was 5 foot 2 inches, weighing 105 pounds, and Lynn was 5 feet tall and weighed only 86 pounds. Lynn used her tiny frame to wiggle through the extremely small passages in Cave 2. She reached the area where they linked together, but it was a mere 5 inches wide in this location. Reaching as far as she possibly could, she was unable to reach Donald's head. It was a winding, cramped little opening that kept her about 2 feet away from reaching him. They were devastated to see that reaching him from that side was not going to be possible. This left the rescue team unable to offer him warm water or nourishment of any kind. Clearly, the timeline for a rescue just got shorter. All through Saturday night, they tried one way and then another to free him. But it was clear, Donald would not be pulled back out, nor moved forward. They would have to try something else. Knowing that time was limited, they called in a different kind of rescue team. They started digging, hoping to break through to the part of the tunnel where Donald was stuck. It took the entire day on Sunday to get close to the right depth. Unfortunately, they were about 12 feet away from the target tunnel. They continued to try to reach him by digging laterally to find a way to connect to the passage. By Sunday night, he had been trapped for 36 hours in a downward angle position. It was only 57 degrees inside the
Can you
caves.
imagine that? Like, you can't even move your hands because your arms are stuck. There's not enough room to move. And he probably had to use the restroom like crazy. Man, that's insane to me. That's why we don't do shit like this. I'm sorry,
To keep
man.
him warm was a serious challenge. Up to this point, they had been using a heat pump to blow warmer air toward him, and some hot water bottles touching his legs where he was exposed. This was the best they could do, since a very limited portion of his body was exposed on their end. Unfortunately, this air heat is no match for the cold stone that was pressed against his body. The risk of exposure and hypothermia is greatly increased in situations where cavers are touching the rock surface. Late on Sunday, at nearly 2 o'clock in the morning, they heard grunting responses from Donald. They knew that he was suffering from hypothermia, but he was still alive. This inspired the rescue team to redouble their digging efforts to reach his tunnel. By Monday morning, they were getting close, but encountered extremely difficult bedrock areas that were impossible to simply dig through. They were starting to think that Donald might not survive this effort. It had been nearly 2 days of being trapped, with no food, no water, and constant cold exposure. A nurse was sent down the main tunnel with a handheld Doppler machine and EKG to determine Donald's status. She was unable to get a pulse with either instrument, but she only had access to his cold legs below the knee. It would not be a 100% confirmation of whether he was still hanging on or not, because the core organs can still function long after the extremities have stopped registering a pulse. Knowing that the situation had just become more dire, they moved to use the most extreme methods available, including dynamite and a backhoe. It was risky, but if they didn't get to him quickly, there was absolutely no chance of his survival. On Tuesday morning, they had finally reached his location, and a doctor was sent down to confirm what was long suspected. Donald Weltner had died. He just could not survive 72 hours in these extreme conditions. The team continued their work to recover his body, though this would not be a simple task. Once they actually reached his location, it still took an entire day to recover his body. The passages were jagged, and the ropes and slings were not a simple lift to get him free. The 150-person rescue team put in a heroic 80-hour effort to rescue Donald Weltner. Despite their best efforts, the freakish nature of this accident prevented Donald from escaping the grip of the cave. His autopsy later confirmed that he died of hypothermia and exposure sometime between Sunday night and Monday morning. He survived these grueling conditions for at least 36 hours, and maybe as long as 48 hours. After Donald's death, the cave system was locked for limited access. A conservancy group now only allows access to groups who meet 2 requirements. They must be experienced cavers and have membership in a recognized caving organization.
Well, obviously, it doesn't matter how experienced you are. When you're dealing with situations like that, your skills can go out the window or experience could go out the window, man. Because things like that can't happen, which it did to this man, and he didn't make it back out, y'all. So with that being said, let me know what you think in the comments below. Would you go cave diving or have you gone cave diving? Because you ain't got to worry about me. I ain't going no cave diving no time soon. So with that being said, man, one love to my people, and I'll be in touch.